So I could just say Mary Oliver said everything I wanted to say, so we can just go have coffee now. Actually, I'd like to start because the first question is about my personal theology. And in order to kind of explain what my personal theology is, let me just go back a little bit and give you a kind of potted history, because some of you may not know much about me and what I did before I became a minister. So I'll start by saying that I have never really planned anything in my life. And so in that sense, I believe in serendipity. I believe that things open up for you if you are looking for them. When I was doing my first degree, a woman who was a couple of years older than me and in the program ahead of me said to me, "Don't ever say no to anything." And I have taken that philosophy to heart, and so I'm really happy with where I am today with never saying no. But then I've learned that actually I need to say no every once in a while, or else I would just go crazy with things, and I have too much on my plate sometimes. But before I came into the ministry, I spent 20 years in higher education, teaching in a university setting. 10 years in England, where I taught. Well, we were there for over 20 years, but I studied there, studied at the University of Leeds and the University of Edinburgh. I got my PhD from the University of Leeds in film and theology. And so although I taught many different things while I was in England, film was really my first love, film and theology. I also taught a women in religion course, a feminist theology course. I taught Judaism. And so I did a lot of different teachings, and the more I taught, the more questions I had. So one of the things that I did when I was in theology and film was to hook up with the people in Europe who are in what they would call ecumenical juries, film juries at film festivals. And so I went to several film festivals during the years I spent in England, and somebody had to do it. You know, it was hard work, really, going to Cannes and Locarno and in the Alps and, watching films. So, but one of those times when we went to Cannes, I was invited to be on the ecumenical jury at the Cannes Film Festival, and that was in May 2001. And so the ecumenical film festival, the ecumenical jury was made up of Protestants and Catholics, and they were from all over Europe and all over the world, actually, because there was a man who was who was from Texas. There was another man from Argentina, and then there were 2 French women and me. And so we had 10 days of watching films, which is wonderful. But when you're up in the morning, first thing at 9 o'clock at a screening, and still at a screening at 11 at night, with a little bit of break in between, it was very challenging. But the interesting thing was that a French documentary crew came to film us because, of course, nobody had ever heard of an ecumenical jury. What did they do? We were celebrating 50 years of existence because it really started right around Second World War was when juries began to be ecumenical. Now, there were other juries at Cannes as well, and you always see those are the ones that have the big film stars, but I was not on those juries. I was on the ones with all the other people who have something to do with religion. And so they made this documentary about us, and I just thought I would start off by showing you a little bit of what we did, and this is nonviolent communication in action, because when you're sitting around talking about a film and why you like it or you hate it, it could get quite intense. And so this is just a little clip from the documentary about our deliberations. And so you see us coming out of a screening and going into a room and starting to go through all the films that we'd seen and knocking out the ones that we didn't like or we liked, and eventually coming up with a prize.
Tout le monde est là.
Let's go.
Really? Excuse me, just... Hello? For me? Then, éloge de l'amour.
s'il te plaît.
Godard.
A ver, en español.
Sí.
Godard. Pero a veces llegamos acá con ideas previas. Uno tendría que olvidarse de lo previo, pero no se puede. Y yo ya tenía el concepto un poco de que Godard es algo pretencioso. O sea, él pretende decir lo que él piensa de las cosas y de los asuntos y no dejar hablar una historia para que los espectadores coloquemos nuestras propias ideas. Listo.
It makes me feel better that I think I'm not alone. I
Que
didn't
estoy diciendo,
realize.
que vos tenías más o menos la misma experiencia.
But I know that you liked it.
I think it's a very beautiful film. There is the strength of the word that tells you phrases. I think he gives power and honor to the words, and he gives power and honor to the images. He's not this person that says words are against image or images. They're both wonderful poetic creations of the human spirit, and he's able to put them.
Okay, and they faded out on him because he just kept talking. So that was really a good experience for church committees, although I didn't know it at the time. So the question here is, how would you label your personal theology or belief orientation? And I would say that film and theology and the study of that really helped me expand my idea of theology or belief. And even though I was trained as a Catholic theologian, I taught in an Anglican college. And so I didn't really practice anything specific to a particular belief system. And in fact, once I began teaching feminist theology and understanding more about goddess spirituality, that was where I began to find my heart and what nourished me. So although I would say I am a theist, I would say that I am leaning into panentheism. And the book that I really got a lot out of, and this was when Roy Reynolds was here, was a book called She Who Changes. Carol Christ is the author, Reimagining the Divine in the World. And it was not an easy book to go through, but by the end of it, you feel really great that you have persevered. So panentheism, and she talks about panentheism in here, and I kind of anticipated this question, not that I wrote it, but I kind of anticipated it. But it's really talking about feminist theologies and theologies using new symbols for God and goddess as she. And for me, a lot of religion and theology is enriched by metaphor. So I'm not a literalist, and so you can't pin me down on a belief system because I see life as metaphorical, and for me, film taught me that people see things in their own way, and that's all you can do, is to perceive things from your own experience. You can't perceive it from anyone else's. And so your idea of what is holy and what the divine is very different from anyone else. But it says in here, panentheism means that the world is in goddess God. In process thought, the world is in goddess God because goddess God sympathetically feels the feelings of every creature. And so panentheism can be said to mean that goddess God is in the world, is felt by and included in every creature. It doesn't separate God from the world. And it says it offers a new way of thinking about the question of how individuals are related to the whole. So for me, whatever the divine is the relationship between us. That's what the divine is to me. That it's love, it's trust, it's caring. So whatever you think the divine is, you will hopefully be able to progress in your thought by being here in this church and by taking part in our services and taking part in our adult faith development. And so just briefly, because I could go on, I'm sorry, I will stop there. But that's what nourishes me, coming to the Goddess Spirituality Group and worshiping with them and realizing that the divine is within us all and between us all. And whatever you think the divine is, I think it's love. I think the divine is love. And so we can't be lost because love finds us no matter where we are. Some of the second question is, what are some of the barriers or conflicts you've experienced in dealing with the religious community in this area? The joys, the cooperations. I will say that I've had an easier time than some of our previous ministers. And I will remember, and somebody was even mentioning this the other day at a meeting. I remember when Roy Reynolds was here, and he was basically kicked off of a committee to plan the Martin Luther King service in Augusta because he would not swear allegiance to Jesus Christ, the Savior. And so what came out of that was actually something wonderful, which was the interfaith community decided that they wanted to get together and really work together. And slowly, those people who were so exclusive of Unitarian Universalists are now working with us. And my great joy last November, when we began the interfaith, it's called Interfaith Child Advocacy Network. Whenever we began that, we had a meeting here, was seeing that minister who told Roy Reynolds that he was not welcome, walk in that door and sit in this sanctuary and participate in that meeting. That was an interfaith meeting. So it's a lot of groundwork done by a few of us, and more of us come to some of those events. So a lot of you have come to the Martin Luther King Interfaith celebration that we have every January. I would say that the challenge to that is, actually having enough time for everything, because those services can last forever, long and long and long, and you lose the will to live while you're sitting there listening. But it's a wonderful expression of the diversity and the interfaith cooperation of this city. I think that can only increase. But I'll just give you a rundown of what's available. In case you're interested in joining these groups, they are wonderful. And so the Progressive Religious Coalition is people who are in religious organizations who hold progressive values. So we have the Interfaith Fellowship of Augusta. People who are in the Progressive Religious Coalition could be members of the Interfaith Fellowship, but not necessarily vice versa, because progressive ideas and values such as women's reproductive rights, LGBT rights, some people who are in the interfaith community don't have those values in their community, but we still fellowship with them in a different way, and we still can work together. Last summer, if you remember, at the Arts in the Heart Festival, we had a children's peace wall that was put up by the Interfaith Fellowship of Augusta, and we had thousands of kids coming by writing messages of peace and putting it up on the wall. So there's a lot of good work that's going on in the religious community. There is, as I mentioned, the Interfaith Child Advocacy Network, which is hoping to educate and motivate the religious houses of faith to work for children's issues. We're planning a Children's Sabbath for October, and that'll be our first event. There's also a wonderful women's interfaith movement that has just kind of sprung up, and it's called the Women's Interfaith Network, and that's exciting too. So all these things are working for the betterment of the Augusta community, and I urge you to look out for the information about events. I try to put them in the e-announcements and in the newsletter, but I have really enjoyed being involved in the interfaith community, and I started doing that while I was living in England. I was actually working for the BBC and also for for Yorkshire Television, which is an independent channel. And I was a researcher for religious programs. And so it was my job to find different things to report on and to make programs about. And so I sought out all the faiths and learned so much from them, not least the Sikhs, who were wonderful there and who are wonderful here. So you learn so much about other people in other communities if you just open yourself up. The next question, what do you think our primary social justice focus should be? And I'm going to probably surprise you by saying something that we probably haven't talked about in this congregation. As I've become involved with especially the Progressive Religious Coalition, and we've talked about perhaps having community organizing to work on the problems of the community, one of the things that I think is desperately needed, speaking as someone who was born and raised here, is reconciliation between the races. I think that has to be our primary focus. And it actually, the focus that we're having today in the Unitarian Universalist Association about decentering whiteness could be applied right here in Augusta. We really need to look again, and this goes way back. I was a teenager when we had the riots in downtown Augusta. No one has ever pulled the various parts of our community together to say, let's talk about what happened there and how we can actually reconcile ourselves and move forward. And I really, with all my heart, I would love to see that happen. I've talked to several people about it and tried to see how we can do it. We came close one time with someone at Augusta University who made a documentary and showed the documentary, and lots of people came who had actually been at that riot. But then the screening was over, the discussion was over, and nobody harnessed that energy to say, let's go from here. I think for Augusta to be great, it needs to come to terms with the divisions in the community, and that to me is the primary social justice focus. All that entails from there, the way that so many people are in poverty, housing needs, hunger, those all stem from that division that came back in the 70s. And so what do I think the greatest challenge our church needs to overcome? I don't particularly think that there's an external threat anymore. I think a lot of people who were in this church felt the suspicion of the wider community saying they're a cult, or even whenever we had the first integrated kindergarten here, that was something to be resisted. That says a lot more about the Augusta community than it does about our congregation. And I think our congregation has worked long and hard for many, many years in the community. We take the phrase building the beloved community seriously, and that's in our mission. And so I think that is not something that we need to overcome, because we are making inroads and we are making good friends and diverse friends in the community. The greatest challenge our church needs to overcome is probably thinking of ourselves as having so much to offer, because Augusta is changing, and the idea of the grant that we applied for to do an outreach campaign to all of those people coming in with new cyber jobs in Augusta, not only the military, although that's a big part of it, but the civilian population and the academic community that's building up around the Cyber Institute and the Cyber Center for Innovation. All of those people are going to be coming here not knowing what Augusta's like. And we can say, here we are. They're coming from California, they're coming from Maryland, they're coming from Virginia. Those are much more liberal places than Augusta, Georgia. And so a liberal religious community has a lot to offer, and we need to make a lot of noise and say we're here. So that's, I think, what we need to overcome is not speaking out. We all need to be that dreaded E word, evangelists. And, so wherever you are and whoever you meet, invite them to come to church. Because church is the culture, is the dominant culture here, and people who are moving here will find out very quickly that that's really one of the first things people ask you, what church do you go to? So the other point about these people coming is that they will have families, a lot of them, and they may want their children to come here and learn how to speak up for themselves and for their values. And that's another important thing that we can do for the wider community. So I think the only thing that stops us is our own hesitancy. But honestly, we have a great gift to give. All of you have stories about how this church saved you. And so we can use those terms like salvation, and we can mean it from our own perspective. So I certainly think that this church saved me, and I'm eternally grateful, and I give thanks every day for this church and the way that we have come together, and we are growing, and we will continue to grow, and we have some exciting things happening, and I look forward to working with you all. Those are all the questions. So that was a short sermon. So if you have any other questions that you don't want to ask in public, then please come and see me, and or send them to me, and I'll try to answer